And quickly and briefly, welcome in some cases back for session 2 with Angela Stockman, a superstar consultant, presenter, educator, all grades, and currently connected with the college and doing some work with the state education department in New York. We only have an hour for part 2, and it's the last hour of the day today. So, Angela, I'm turning it over to you. I'll attempt to keep things up and rolling in the chat with the links and stuff, and you concentrate on taking us through it for the ride.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm Angela Stockman. I'm from Buffalo. If you were in my last session, I will not bore all of you with introductions all over again, but suffice it to say, I started my career at the elementary level. I spent a lot of time teaching high school. The bulk of my career was at the middle level when I taught in K-12, and now I'm faculty at Daemen University. I've also been consulting in schools for over 20 years now. And my areas of particular interest are multiliteracy instruction and pedagogical documentation. If you are a Reggio-inspired educator, that is like totally my jam. I'm all about bringing that up to the high school level, though, which is kind of uncommon. So anyway, Rick asked that I redrop this beautiful link to David Robertson's work into the chat for all of you. You'll find it there. And then I'm also going to share my slides with you because you might want access to some of the different things that I'm going to be sharing. Could you maybe in the chat on a scale of 1 to 4, 4 being very experienced, 1 being not experienced at all, tell me how much experience you have with artificial intelligence so far. Just put it right into the chat. Scale of 1 to 4. And let me know a little bit about what you teach. What grade levels do you teach and where? That would be a wonderful thing for me to be able to see as we get started here. All right. Good, good, good. Wonderful. I think some of the things that I'm going to share with you today are going to be pretty helpful. If you were in my first session, then you know that that was all about basic prompt crafting and also getting a sense of how do we make ethical choices? You know, what does it mean to use AI for good? And what does it mean to use AI disastrously? I shared a framework for that in the first session, and we got into some basic prompt crafting protocols, which I'll revisit briefly in this session too. But if you're in my slides, then what you're going to see is that we're really focusing on some more complex prompt crafting. And even if you're a beginner, you may not necessarily, dive headlong into some of the recommendations I'm going to share with you today, but you'll have a good context for them. And I want you to have my slides so that you can come back to them over time, as well as your own experiences with AI kind of shift and improve. We're going to warm up pretty fast because this is a quick session. There are 3 different tools that I invite you to play with. Choose one. You can experiment with them all. The first is Claude. The second is ChatGPT, and the third is Gemini. You can use the free versions. If you have pay versions, that's fine too. I just want you to open up one of those tools and ask it to do something for you. Maybe have it define a concept, or ask it to create a lesson about a concept. Ask it to locate 10 videos that might teach students about that concept, or 10 open source short stories that might illustrate that concept. Go ahead and take a minute to do that, probably give you a few. Then I'm going to ask you to share with me how it went. Go ahead. Bev, what were your questions? What are you wondering still?
Well, I'm always just still wondering about it taking the place of a teacher. Like,
Okay.
do you know what about the work that we do as teachers and
Mhm.
meeting the needs of our diverse classes?
So I'm going to share some examples with you and stories today that might help you think that through because I worry about it too. And I can share some examples of where it actually helped me meet the needs of my students better and faster. And then some other areas where I won't go there. And I won't use it for certain purposes. And it's, these are all choices that we're making. If you were in the last session, then that one of the more basic ways we begin to use these chatbots is by asking it to do something simple. So if you didn't work with me an hour ago, I introduced these different sorts of prompt crafting concepts. One is a 0-shot prompt where you just ask it to do one simple thing, like define motif. And another is a few-shot prompt where you'll say, define motif for my students and use a popular song to do it. You can also then get into a conversation where even as the chatbot is giving you output, you're asking it through a response to refine it over and over and over again so that it actually looks the way that you need it to. One of the protocols that I shared in our last session is the crafts protocol, where we begin with a call to action, like explain the concept of symbolism in literature. Assume the role of a fourth grade teacher who is about to teach symbolism to her fourth grade students for the very first time. Use simple language, that a fourth grader would understand. You can even ask it to offer examples that are specific to the place that you live in. So symbols from whatever area in Alberta that you might be coming from, Grand Prairie or Edmonton or Calgary, wherever it is you live, situate your example of symbolism in something relevant to where we live that fourth graders might understand. One of the things that I spoke to in our last session is the importance of adding this language that ensures that AI is a bit less biased than we know it is. And you can control for that a bit by ensuring that your prompt directs the AI tool to use neutral language that doesn't assume the characteristics, roles, or preferences based on race, age, gender, or ability. I've been finding that that does make a difference. This session is all about designing really complex prompts. And I'll be honest in telling you that I find that of all of the AI tools, Claude is the tool that handles this kind of output really well. This week, I am in the middle of final exam week for the fully asynchronous online course that I teach. All of my students, I have 100 of them, are Hasidic Jewish women who live in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. All of them are newcomers to the country. Very few of them speak English, and they have to use APA 7 formatting to write a research paper in order to meet the objectives of my sociolinguistics course. So this is how I used that prompt crafting protocol just this week to help my students better understand concepts that we were studying. Assume my position as an instructor to Hasidic women from Williamsville or Williamsburg, New York. I forgot my K there, who are also new English language learners. That context changes everything. Define the following sociolinguistic concepts using words that they will understand. And these are our terms for this week: Pidgin, Creole, language death, code switching, language varieties, H variety, L variety. Offer examples of each concept that are relevant to their own context and reference the community of Williamsburg and its features whenever possible. Use neutral language that does not assume the characteristics, roles, or preferences based on race, age, gender, or ability. My students, I have nearly 100 of them, flooded my inbox with thanks because the answers that were provided here really were specific to very specific streets, parks, stores, and community centers in their neighborhood. The examples that it gave around code switching spoke specifically to Yiddish and Hebrew, and it did it in a nuanced way that I would not have understood or been able to use. As a teacher to students who are culturally very different from me, Hasidic Judaism is an incredibly conservative and also cloistered culture. And so I don't know a lot. All of my students, when they're in my class, by the end of this month, will be arranged to be married. And they're very excited about that. And I've learned wonderful things about them as a result of being in relationship with them. But for me to be able to define these concepts in a way that is respectful of and deeply referencing their culture, I don't have that cultural capital. I don't have that background, right? And so one of the more profound ways that I find myself using AI is by challenging it to make my teaching more culturally relevant. And that forces me to think about how my students' identities are different from my own. I'm going to pause here for a minute and stop sharing. And I want to put you into breakout rooms for about 5 minutes to have this conversation with one another. How might you use AI in a similar way? How might you use AI to become closer to your students? Like I said, mine literally flooded my inbox and said, when I read the textbook, I could not understand these terms. But when I shared the AI output with all of them, which literally spoke to the world that they're living in and the families that they're a part of and how they use language and how they worship and also how they move about Williamsburg, where incidentally I have not been. It helped them immediately understand those concepts. How might you think about using AI in a similar way to become a more culturally sustaining teacher? I'm going to put you in breakout rooms for about 5 minutes and you can have that conversation together. I actually can't do it. Rick, want to help me out? All right, so welcome back, everybody. I am going to share my screen and I want to walk you through how I did this. Right before the break, I shared with all of you that I just did this week. I'm teaching a sociolinguistics course. We learned a ton of terms. I have students who are very different from me, and I wanted to use AI to kind of give them definitions that were really contextualized in a way that they could understand. So I used that prompt crafting protocol, and this is exactly the prompt that I used. And I'm going to show you the actual conversation. Assume the role of a college instructor who teaches acidic women who are 20 years old, analyze the content that follows, and define the sociolinguistic concepts that they are struggling to understand. Then provide definitions in simple language and examples that they might relate to given their context. This is the content. So this is what I did to get this content. Here's a discussion board in my course. I have permission from my students to share this with you. What I asked my students to do was to tell me, of all of the concepts I taught you this week, which ones do you understand best? Which ones do you understand least? And where are you feeling frustrated this week? What's frustrating you about our course? These are all of their answers. So I literally clicked on this. I highlighted 100 responses. I just keep going, going, going. It's going to go. It's keeping highlighting. Responses are loading. This is all 100 students' responses. I right-clicked on it and copied it. And then I went over here and I literally pasted it right here. It analyzed all 100 responses and it pulled out the trends and what the terms were that they said they didn't understand. If I sat here with a pencil and paper and tallied all of that, it would have taken me all weekend to get that data. So you know what? I never used to do this. I used to ask them to share out what they didn't understand. And I used to try and clarify a little bit and told them to make an office hour with me if they needed more help. And none of them did because they're busy. So here it analyzed and it's starting to. A pidgin is a simplified language that develops between groups who don't share a common language. It's a makeshift language used for basic communication. A Creole is what happens when a pidgin becomes a full language, usually when children grow up speaking pidgin as their first language. Imagine your great-grandparents came from different countries and didn't speak the same language. That is 100% of my students. To communicate, they might have created a simple mix of Yiddish and English words. My students experienced this, they told me. That's similar to what a pidgin is. Now, if their children grew up speaking this mix as their main language and turned it into a full language with its own grammar rules, that would be like a Creole. I said to my students when I messaged them these responses, because I cut and pasted this into a course message, tell me if this is right. Tell me if this makes sense. I'm not from your culture. Call me out if I got it wrong. I'm really open to being corrected here. Tell me. And they celebrated this. So in your community, the vernacular might be the specific dialect of Yiddish that you use at home or with your friends. It includes the unique phrases, pronunciations, and expressions that are common in your daily conversations, but you might not use it at synagogue. I wouldn't know to talk about it this way. I grew up in the Catholic Church. It's a very different culture. And so for me to be able to give my students this level of support was fabulous. And then I engaged it more. Please do the same for each of these terms. And then at one point, because I kept doing it over and over for different terms because it did such a great, use more examples that are relatable to Hasidic women, but not focused on Yiddish, because it gave me 20 different Yiddish examples. And it gave me more examples that got into their history. This right here, genre of an event, I don't even know what some of these words mean. A Shabbos meal, a Telem group, and a Chesed committee meeting are different genres of events. So when I shared that with my students, I said, I need you to know I don't know what this means. And one of them said, I'll hop on an office hour with you. I would love to tell you what this means. It took 5 minutes. And it was this beautiful opportunity for me to get to know my students better, and they became my teachers. Restate this and includes more simple definitions, as well as relatable examples of each word, right? And it did this gorgeous job. There's one prompt, though, where I ask it to reference Williamsburg specifically right here. Are there current events happening in Hasidic communities in Brooklyn, New York that might illustrate some of these concepts? And there sure are. Look right here. In neighborhoods like Borough Park and Williamsburg, which is where all of my students live, you'll see a unique linguistic landscape. Store signs, posters, and public notices often appear in a mix of English, Yiddish, and Hebrew, even though they're in New York State. This visual representation of multiple languages in public spaces is a perfect example of what is meant by linguistic landscape. Knocked their socks off. They were so grateful that I was giving them examples that they could relate to. And so this is a great example in my world of how AI is helping me close the distance between me and my students. This is what it looks like to humanize education and learning using artificial intelligence. It also is very respectful in that. And I think this is so important that I'm telling my students, I don't know for sure if AI got it right. You have to tell me if these examples are wrong. And really being humble about that and owning the fact that it might make mistakes has been a beautiful thing as well. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. Thoughts or questions, anything that some of you, things that you might notice, insights, or things that you want to ask clarifying questions about? Anyone?
And what jumps to my mind while others are maybe gathering their thoughts on this, because if I'm teaching in a school that has had a significant influx of immigrants from X, Y, and Z, how might I leverage this exact process to help me make things relatable for a group of students who have come to me from this country, and this country, or this continent, and this continent?
The first thing that I think is so important is to, for instance, empathy work is just where you begin with all of this. And what do I mean by that? I mean that initial conversations, mine was, tell me which terms you don't understand and tell me what you're frustrated by this week. But prior to that, I already knew that all of my students were Hasidic Jewish women. Our program is made specifically for them. If your students are coming from very diverse places, asking them to share, where did you come from? not just the continent or the country, but even the town can be very helpful. What languages did your parents speak? Tell us about your people and your history. The more you can learn about that, it's going to inform the way you prompt the AI tool to give you better output. I've been really blown away by its ability to reference place. And I'm going to show you another example of how it did a really phenomenal job with your new curriculum in Ontario, on the Ontario side of things, in just a minute. But yeah, Jane dropped something into the chat. We can use AI in a positive way to provide agency to students. Yeah. So what's hard sometimes is I find myself in professional circles with people who are really slamming AI. I have people that I admire very much. John Warner's one of them. He wrote How to, Killing the Five Paragraph Essay, and he's very well regarded in writing circles. Jen Fletcher is a really good friend of mine. Lots of my friends are very skeptical about AI, but I don't know that many people are thinking about using it this way just yet. They're thinking about very simple applications. And while you were in breakout rooms, Rick and I were having this more kind of nuanced conversation about this fact. Sadly, so much of the narrative around the use of AI has been around efficiency. How can teachers do things faster? And how can they do them in a way that loosens up all of this time for you to do other things? And you can use it in that way. And that's not a bad thing at all. For example, a couple of years ago, COVID left me with severe liver damage. And I had to completely overhaul everything I was eating in order to be able to heal that liver damage. And it was putting an exhausting amount of pressure on me for meal prep and planning. It was very complex. I learned how to use AI to create menu plans and shopping lists. It helped me with budgeting. That freed up some time and gave it back to me on the weekends. There's nothing wrong with that. What I think a lot of people are worried about is, especially inexperienced or new teachers, using AI to produce lesson plans, and they're not going to sharpen their own saw then. It's going to weaken their ability to design in really quality ways. Here's what we know. AI can lower the cognitive load on your working verbal memory. And that's a beautiful thing. That can lighten stress. It can lighten your cognitive load in ways that frees up space for you to be more creative or to level up your service to students. If all we're doing is lowering our cognitive load so that, and then we don't do anything else to become, better teachers, that's where I think we're going to see some harm done, and we're going to lose some real skill and talent. Because yeah, you can use this thing to design your lessons and to design all sorts of resources, and then we just start disengaging from our own learning. What I was able to do in this example that I just showed you, my course is an intensive course. It's just 4 weeks long. My students have to accomplish in 4 weeks what most students accomplish in a 15-week semester. They have to do 4 major assignments, including a major research paper, and they have to build it around all of these concepts that are really new to them, and many of them are newcomers to the country. Prior to AI, there was no way that I could get through all of those discussion board posts and be able to really get analytics around the terms that they didn't understand, let alone create these contextualized definitions and examples. So because I lowered the load, my own cognitive load around having to do that work, it allowed me to be able to share these examples with them and then pop into office hours where they were telling me their stories and telling me about their families. And all of a sudden, I have this more human asynchronous course where in the past it felt very much like the screen was a very heavy barrier between me and my students. I'm being very intentional about lowering cognitive load in one way so that I can really do much more creative and human work in another. And I want to show you another example of that really quickly that I think you're going to appreciate. So here we go. And I'm going to present again my slides. Here's another prompt that I used with a teacher 2 days ago. I do a lot of one-on-one consulting work or small group curriculum design work with teachers in Ontario, Canada. This was the prompt that I used. This teacher had just received new curriculum. He is a brand new teacher this year. He taught before in the past, but never 8th grade. Assume my role, me, as an instructor to graduate level education majors who are currently teaching elementary school in Ontario, Canada. My students in my grad school program this fall are in the school that another teacher that I work with is practicing in, and I'm working with him as a consultant, right? We're designing curriculum together. In recent weeks, I've learned that most of my undergrad students who are pre-service teachers are interested in learning more about Indigenous truth and reconciliation in Ontario schools. They're interested in learning about place-based learning, mindfulness, and practices that will also sustain their own mental health for this school year. How do I know this? Because during our opening conversations, I asked my students in my graduate level class, what are you most interested in learning about? And what are you also worried about? And many of them told me these things. I asked AI to produce 10 to 20 human experience, non-academic concepts that connect their interests and needs and to express them as single words. And then I asked them to illustrate how those same concepts relate to social studies, math, literacy, and science learning in their K-5 schools. So I began with my students. I asked them, what are you most interested in learning about yourself this year as a teacher? And what are you worried about? And they told me as teachers what they were concerned about. I asked AI to connect the teacher's interests to the curriculum and come up with concepts that the teacher could teach around. This can look another way. The teacher that I'm working with in Ontario is an 8th grade teacher who is teaching an integrated curriculum, integrating language arts for 8th grade with geography, social studies, and health. I asked him to give me his curriculum expectations, and we started teasing out, he did, in green and yellow, content and skills. These are the curriculum expectations that he pulled right from his curriculum documents in Ontario for English, history, geography, and health. Our work together is going to include designing a curriculum for him that's integrated. So I took this with him because I want to know how to get started with concept-based curriculum design. I highlighted all of this. I right-clicked on it, oops, and just hit copy, right? Just like I did with the last piece. And I pasted it into ChatGPT or Claude. I asked it to develop a curriculum sequence, a topical curriculum sequence that was concept-based and aligned to this curriculum. And it came up with this. And I'm going to share this document with all of you in the chat. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to look this over. And this is what I mean when I say that Claude can actually handle more intense output. So if you go right into the chat in 1 second, this is the document, and you can open your own copy of it. This is giving us a lot to riff off of. And I will tell you that this particular teacher will own the fact, he'll tell you he hasn't taught in about 5 years. He just got hired. He doesn't want to teach these content areas in a step-by-step, check the boxes sort of fashion. He wants to create integrated units that are built around really powerful concepts. So in September, his students are going to be studying identity, patterns, and creating and sustaining community. The first thing he's doing next week is he's bringing in a picture of a place that is his perfect place to learn at home. When he's learning at home, what's the perfect place for him to do it? And he's going to talk about how that place that is his perfect place to learn, how it's reflective of his identity. and who he is as a person. Each student in class is also going to bring in a picture, and they're going to speak about their perfect place to learn when they're not in school. He is going to teach them to look for patterns in all of the pictures. And they're going to start to define not only their individual identity and how it relates to place, but they're going to look for patterns in those perfect learning places. And they're going to talk about how they might replicate that in the classroom. If you love to learn in this place and you love to learn in that place, what are the features of those places you love to learn in? How might we bring them into our shared space? So in English, they're going to be doing personal narrative writing and creating place-based narratives. And they're going to be starting to study some cultural texts. In geography, it's going to bridge to their exploration of human settlement patterns and cultural influences on land use. In social studies, it's going to open conversations about identity and indigenous identities and immigrant experiences in early Canada. And that's going to lead to very nuanced conversations about gender identity, sexual orientation, and self-concepts and health. These are not going to be siloed learning experiences. Our work together this summer is designing an integrated unit that brings all of this together. I don't know for sure that we're going to pursue all of the ideas that Claude offered us in this document, but what I can tell you is it took us 5 minutes to generate this place that we can leap off of. Yeah. So the prompt I'll put right here at the bottom of the page. I'll put it right in the document for you. It's something like this. Analyze curriculum that follows and identify, and this was important, identify humanistic, non-academic concepts that relate to every domain, including English, geography, social studies, and health. Propose a topical outline that integrates the study, that integrates studies inside of these disparate content areas. The curriculum or the topical outline should unfold between September and June. Break down how the concepts connect to each content area and align the outline to the curriculum. Here is the curriculum. And I put, and I do this often, a colon there. And then all I did was I went up, I copied, like I highlighted all of this, right clicked on it, copied it, and then I pasted it right here and I just hit paste. And that was the prompt, very similar to the prompt that I used. I will tell you, it's taken 2 years of playing with AI to get to a place where I can like write prompts like that very quickly. But this is what higher level use can challenge you to do. And we may not like or use all of this output. It would have taken me weeks to get to this leaping off point. And it would have also probably really frustrated this teacher who is in the middle of trying to do 1,000 other things. So here's the other side of the coin that we keep tossing in the air around AI. Yes, it is possible that teachers are going to use AI in a way that disengages them from their work. But if I had asked a teacher who has not been in the classroom for almost 10 years to design curriculum around those particular competencies, it would have been siloed curriculum where he taught English separate from geography, separate from social studies, separate from health. And it would have been very much a check the boxes sort of an approach. When we got this output, he said to me, I think I'm starting to understand what you mean by concept-based curriculum design and how I can integrate, the study of these concepts and this content inside of one single unit. That's what I mean when I say that AI can actually help us learn more. It can make us better teachers. It can make us better designers. This is a skill that he will now be able to replicate in other settings without using AI. He needed examples to be able to shift his thinking. And could I have asked him to read a book or attended a 3-hour or 3-day training on how to do this? I could have, but it saved us a lot of time that he's now using to get his classroom ready and to read the books that he's going to be using with his students. And he's thinking about independent reading now a little bit differently. It bought him some time back. So that's an example of what I mean when I say I have a very difficult time talking in binary, absolute ways about whether or not AI is good or bad, whether it's going to make us a lazy teacher or a smarter teacher. The last example I want to share with all of you, it's just a quick story from last night. And I'm going to get into this in a deeper way during tomorrow's session. My first session tomorrow is focusing on using AI tools to generate higher quality feedback for writers. I explained before that I'm working with 100 students this summer. They are all writing essays for the first time. Many of them are new English language learners. If I did not have AI, I would not have been able to build in 4 feedback cycles over 4 weeks. So they were able to write a draft of this paper, very rough, very beginner level work. And I was able to get each of my students 8 paragraphs of actionable feedback that was linked to resources and tutorials. All of them got 8 paragraphs each in 12 hours after they submitted their first drafts. And I did that 4 more times this semester where they resubmitted after they got that feedback. And I gave them another round of actionable feedback within 12 hours. That gave them 5 additional days to work on their writing. In the past, I only did 1 feedback cycle, and it took me 7 days of full-time work to get feedback like that back on 100 drafts. They got 4 feedback cycles. They had 20 additional days of writing time this summer. And that's the point of feedback. The faster we can get it to students and the more time they have to take action, the more likely it is that they're going to be able to improve their learning and their work. More importantly, I'm just going to be totally honest with you. When I'm putting feedback on 100 research papers as a human being, 2 things happen. The first is that I start to become my feedback becomes automated. I start to notice the same errors over and over again, and I start to just comment on the same thing on every single paper. When I give AI my rubric and I ask it to generate the feedback in a very specific way, every single one of my students got very different feedback. And it was very, very fresh. Another tip, before I asked AI to give my students feedback on their writing, I asked it to learn how to use my feedback style and my voice. So I said, Claude, analyze 3 samples of how I give students feedback. Take note of my voice and my feedback style. Then in a subsequent prompt, I said, use my voice and my feedback style to provide actionable feedback on the manuscript that follows using these rubric criteria. All of the feedback that went back to my students sounds like me. It references their names. It uses the same sort of craft moves that I do as a writer. And it is not evident of my very human fatigue. Also, it noticed things that I've never paid attention to, and it's helped me look at their work in a better way. It's making me a little bit of a better teacher. And so I have a very difficult time arguing with that when I have students who are newcomers to the country in an intensive course. Can pictures of students' hard copies be used in generating feedback? I've never done it that way before, Cheryl. And so I imagine that some of these tools that have the image capacity, the capacity to analyze visuals or pictures or images, it might work. I've never tried it, so I don't know. Tomorrow, my first session of the day, it's in the early afternoon session at 1:40. Well, it's 1:45 my time, so I think it's 11:45 your time. Is that right, Rick? I can't remember.
Yes.
Yeah, that session is dedicated to how I did this. So if you want to know, like, what were the specific steps that I went through, I'm going to model it for you tomorrow in that session. It'll take me that whole session to set you up to do that well. But feel free to drop by. And are these sessions, they are being recorded, right, Rick? Yeah, so just look for session 3. If you can't come to the session in person, you'll have a video there, and I'm gonna model the entire process for you right within that specific session, if that makes sense. I'm gonna pause here because I just threw a lot at you. Questions, things that you want to ask about. I see Rick in the chat put, I was thinking of using AI to pull out the essential ideas for the grade 8 ELA outcomes. I'm trying to word my prompt to get the best possible outcome. Do you think this is possible? Yeah, I would just say, I would probably use that crafts protocol and say, assume the role of whoever you are. If you're a curriculum director, if you're a teacher, think of who the audience is going to be, and then ask it to identify those essential ideas. Sometimes I'll find that when it doesn't necessarily, there's so much that we assume as teachers. Like when I say essential questions to ChatGPT, um, it will elaborate for miles, right? When I just wanted the question. So sometimes you have to ask a follow-up prompt to get it to be able to refine the response. How do you prevent the students from using ChatGPT to write their stories and essays? You don't. And we can have that conversation as well. You can't prevent students from using ChatGPT or any other AI tool to produce output. What you can do is control the way you're inviting them to write stories and make process work really important. In my world, it looks like this. I ask my students to always write stories about their personal experiences and narratives that are grounded in research and information that's really very ethnographic or experiential. So they have to conduct interviews, they have to ground their stories and facts and information they gathered from observations so that ChatGPT can't predict that for them. I often ask my students to build their stories multimodally first. So I ask them to draw their storyboards, or I ask them to build with loose parts like Legos or Play-Doh or clay, and I ask them to take pictures. We do a lot of reflective work throughout the whole process. And I ask them to document their learning process where they're making notes and taking pictures and capturing audio and video. And that final draft is a product of really step-by-step, bit-by-bit, process-based teaching. And I can often have them write by hand or draw by hand in class if I'm trying to control for this. Does every kid still have the potential to hop on AI and pound out, a story for everybody? They do. But I find that if I'm taking care to create a context where the process matters more than the product, and I'm really aware of how that process is unfolding, usually they're well prepared to write the draft. And I've broken it up into small enough chunks that they have confidence enough to write it on their own. When my students have used AI inappropriately, every single time the time has been too short, I haven't taught the process, there's been no feedback, and it's not at all related to anything they're interested in. I've just assigned writing. And sometimes I have to do that, right? And so they're going to turn to AI when that's the case. If it's irrelevant, there's not enough time, they haven't had good instruction, and the process has not mattered, and they haven't been well supported with feedback, they're going to use AI. But if the context is something that's very meaningful to them, if they have to rely on personal experiences, if I've taken care to teach the process one step at a time and ask them to produce just a little bit of the text at a time, and they've had lots of feedback through the whole process, the likelihood of them using AI is much lower. So that's how I think about, prevention of inappropriate use. If others of you have other ideas or things that you've been trying that are useful, I hope you'll drop them into the chat. We're coming up on the last 5 minutes of the session. Are there any other questions that you want to ask? Anything at all? Right. You are so welcome. One of the things, I just want to share my screen again really quick. And I want to invite you here for a second. If you take a peek at the very last page, it says, please stay in touch. And it's going to be on all of my slide decks. When you go here, you're going to see that I have a newsletter. In addition, if you scroll down, I'm giving you a lot of free content here. It'll say free, 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 free. There's webinars and all sorts of things here that you are most welcome to dive into and use, including this thing called the English Teacher's Guide to AI. This is actually a 50-page document. I shared it in my first session. I'm sharing it again tomorrow. This particular session, I'm not digging into it in a really big way, but it's a free resource. It's a free guide and you're welcome. That's where you can find it. Just click on the last slide where it says, please stay in touch, and scroll down to where you see the English Teacher's Guide to AI. Just drop your email here and it'll get delivered right to your inbox. I am going to share it in tomorrow's sessions as well. I want to thank all of you for being here. I truly do mean it when I say stay in touch. As you're using all of these things, know that I'm pretty approachable online, or drop me an email. I'm happy to talk shop with you anytime. I hope I see some of you tomorrow as well. Thanks for being here.